The Planning Commission workshop, and today we're focusing on tree ordinance, and we will start with any public comments. We'd like to hear from you. Please.
Hello everyone, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Lee Bundrick. I'm the Senior Conservation Coordinator with the Kiowa Conservancy. I'm here to talk about the tree ordinance, and I want to commend the Planning Commission and the Planning Department for putting together the tree ordinance. We think it's a great cause to protect all of the major asset of Kiowa Island, which is the trees, and which provide all this natural habitat which we serve to protect on the island. In reviewing some of these things, I think some of, I think there was a mention of the Cape as being one of the things that sort of sparked the intent of creating this. And I wanted to bring up another specific situation that happened to us a few years ago, right before the PGA Championship, to one of our properties. When we were monitoring some of the properties, we noticed that a half-acre portion of our natural habitat had been completely cleared down. All of the shrubs removed, a number of trees removed, and it was something that the Conservancy didn't do, but some of the adjacent homeowners. And one of the questions that I've been kind of looking into while reading this ordinance is to kind of ascertain whether or not, whenever the planning director or somebody from the Planning Commission looks at these issues, is whether or not they look at the ordinance and see whether or not it is the landowner that needs to be responsible for the mitigation, or it is the party that is responsible for removing the trees and making sure the mitigation is kind of tacked on to the right specific party. And I think that's something that would likely be a good thing to look into and possibly try to incorporate within the ordinance to provide guidance for future Planning Commission members, members of the Tree Advisory Board, and the Planning Director. And I think that gives some guidance for extra things to think about whenever something happens to our property. Some other things, and I think there was a mention by the Bartlett arborists whenever they submitted public comment that I thought was something that should be considered as well, is that pruning in the right way to make sure that the tree is kept in a healthy state should be paramount to everything, and that the ANSI standards that they mentioned, I think it was ANSI 300, so is something that should be abided by, because it makes sure that the health of the tree is intact while you still remove the branches that are either dying, decaying, or are an impediment to the use, or this, that, and the other. So trying to put in any sort of standards that would help protect the health of a tree while still maintaining some of the pruning standards is something that should be considered as well. And I think that the best source for this would be from the International Society of Arboriculturists. So they're involved with the certification of arborists, as well as setting standards for how trees should be maintained and their health improved. So I think that having that reflected within the ordinance would be something that would be in, that would be beneficial to the tree ordinance and would sort of heighten the quality of it. And these are just some of the thoughts I had after reading it, and I'm more than happy to provide any other comments. I'll be continuing to look into this as well and participating in these workshops. I just wanted to give you my first few thoughts about this and to the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. I've asked Dr. Kern, one of our commissioners, to kind of give us a brief update, especially for your benefit, as to the tree ordinance committee and where we've started and how we've got here and where we are now. If you would, Dr. Kern.
Sure. So this has been going on for quite a few months now, and we started by looking at a number of other municipalities' tree preservation ordinances, and through numerous meetings and workshops, we've put together this latest draft dated 11/21/2023, which I hope everyone's had a chance to review. You know, I would say as we've gone through this process, we've learned quite a bit, and also I think we've become, you know, I think we've been lowering our expectations a little bit. I think we had fairly grandiose expectations initially about preserving all the trees and mitigating, and I think we've, with Jen's help from the ARB, I think we've become a little bit more realistic. And I think that, you know, I think we still have some room to go. I think, you know, I don't feel like this is quite ready for a final document. We're gonna take some of these latest public comments and incorporate them and maybe have one more meeting with Jen, and then hopefully be able to put together a final document by next week for the Planning Commission meeting. But that's our goal, is to have a final document by next week. So if you do have other thoughts, please communicate them with John, because we are getting to the end of this process.
Thanks, Dr. Curran. I know Joanne and Larry, you also served on the subcommittee, went to a lot of those meetings. Any additional comments you'd like to have, Joanne?
No, we appreciate all the community input and Ron has done, I think, the heavy lifting on this, so thank you.
Thanks. But we've obviously learned a lot from Jen. She's really, her advice has been priceless, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
No comment.
No comment. Larry, any thoughts? I'm sorry, Andy?
Are we going to review the draft now, or are you here? How do you want to handle it?
John said he may be joining us, so I'll kind of wait and see if he joins us, and if not.
Bill, Jen had a question. of
Yes.
course.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll have the commissioners see if they have any comments, and we'll give the floor to you. How about that?
And can we be a little, because this is a workshop, we can be a little
Sure,
interactive.
sure.
It doesn't have to be strict
Sure.
public comment, strict us. We can have back and forth, I think would
Absolutely.
be helpful for the whole
So
process.
I've had a thought since our last meeting, and, you know, I think it's, at our last meeting, we decreased the mitigation standards to, instead of diameter replacement to tree for a tree. But we kept the diameter replacement for the specimen trees, which are the trees that are over 24 inches, or all the live oaks over 16 inches. And sort of thinking about it, and actually, you know, kind of looking around at some of the new construction, I kind of wonder if that's still too punitive. That, you know, for example, if a house, if there's new construction and they want to, and they have to take down 4 of those specimen trees, which would, again, at least 16 inches and maybe up to 24 inches. So with our current mitigation, I mean, they're replacing anywhere from, they're having to put in anywhere from 4 to 8 trees for every specimen tree they take down. And say if there's 4 trees that's in the buildable area that they have to remove to build the home, then potentially you're, you know, talking 20-some new trees. And looking at some of these lots, because they are building, you know, close to the setbacks, I mean, they're building most of the buildable area, there's not even room for 20 trees. So I was wondering what your thoughts were. I mean, I just thinking about that, I felt that maybe we're still too, our demands are still too high. At one point, we had put in 70%, you know, diameter replacement. So I just was wondering again what your thoughts were. It's, like I said, it just seems that we really, I mean, for somebody to be planting 20, 25 new trees, it seems like it's pretty difficult.
We did.
Those, specimen trees that really design teams and owners to try to of unique character.
Right.
And maybe
Well, all of these also have at the discretion of the planning director. So if it did seem to be an unreasonable demand for mitigation, then you could appeal to the planning director and he could, again, lower that.
Ron, would you see this to be an issue that could go to the tree board?
Well, again, we're trying to, I think that's also part of the new document. John put in there that, what we want to see go to the tree preservation board are when there's been an appeal, and the planning director has denied something and the owner is appealing. So that would go to the tree preservation board, or under the circumstance where they just want to, they're not appealing the planning director's decision, but they're appealing the tree ordinance specifications. So those are the two circumstances that we want to go to the tree preservation board. So I don't think we want a lot going to the tree preservation board, because again, we don't want to slow down the process if necessary.
Yeah, but in this particular case, I was thinking hypothetically, if somebody, to your point, you're a good example, I need to put 20 trees in because I took, a 24-inch tree down. And the planning director says it follows it's within the regulation that should be done. I think that could be an appealable issue to the preservation board, right?
Yes. So if there's a dispute about the planning director's decision, that would go to the tree preservation
Even
board.
if his decision is within the guidelines of the regulation?
Right.
Okay.
And then the other thing, like I said, that would go is if there's a dispute with the actual ordinance. So that somebody doesn't want to follow the ordinance.
Well, that would be this one, too. They don't want to follow the inch for inch, because that's,
Right.
so.
But I think we also said for the, and I remember Stephanie said this, that we need, that part of the role of the tree preservation board was we needed an extra layer that that it was too much responsibility for the planning director alone, that on some of these major things that we wanted an extra layer that she thought. And I think we agreed with her that there should be that extra layer, particularly on major projects.
Again, this would be somewhat similar to your ability to give it an opportunity for some wiggle room within the regulation based on unique circumstances. Would you see it that way?
when I see the tree preservation.
Somebody would say, yes, we're supposed to mitigate, 20 trees. This seems unreasonable. The director says, no, that's the law, or that's the regulation, and then they take it to the tree board. And then the tree review board would be that board that would use some judgment.
And so your question to me is?
That's similar to what you do.
No.
No?
The way that it's handled now is that the staff has the flexibility to say, to hear an applicant who says, I can't put 20 trees on this property. And, we're trained, educated professionals, and we can look at a site and agree, yeah, you can't fit 20 trees on that property.
Okay.
And give them an allowance to not do that, but to instead put in the quantity and the placement of trees that makes sense, both to meet our guidelines of settling a home and that makes sense horticulturally in terms of tree placement. and distance from each other.
Okay, and when you use staff in your context, that would be, in this context, the planning director.
It would.
So you would prefer the planning director have that ability?
I would, yes. I think it's a better solution and process for owners and their design teams.
But you had an additional, an additional expertise. You have people who are tree experts, and we don't know what the planning director is a tree expert or not.
Well, we know that John is not a tree expert. He's not here to defend himself, but we've also talked about that. I would hope that the plan would be to hire someone for the planning, who would report to the planning director, who is educated either as an arborist or in landscape architecture.
I think when we make our recommendation to the town council, we can add as an addendum to it the recommendation that the tree board have that expertise.
Yeah, didn't we talk about that the
think we
designee,
did,
when
yes,
we
I
talked
did.
about, because they said, yes, we need to hire someone. I think we have some builders present. We haven't heard from builders in our subcommittee. If there are any unique things, could we, what do you think?
I have one question, if I may. Charles Hudson with Hudson Designs. Thank you for taking my time here. In talking and piggybacking off of what Jennifer says, when will the sequencing of all of this happen? Because currently we meet with Jennifer, we get a good plan on what trees can and cannot be saved. So when will this person be notified, or when would we have to notify this person about which trees need to be handled?
I think that's a great question, and I don't think we have the answer to that question. And I think that's, we want to sort of get the ordinance finished, and then after that, then we're going to delve into how the process is going to occur. Because I think that process is a big question and kind of its own area. So I think we're sort of concentrating on the document for right now and trying to get the document complete. And then after that, then we're going to figure out how we're going to do this.
Except, didn't John say he was doing, because we raised that issue in our last subcommittee
there's
meeting,
stuff-
and he was going to think on it, and he was already thinking about the process. Hopefully he gets here, he can tell us where he's at.
No, I think we've heard already that the process needs to change, that the way it's currently done, the zoning permit is too late in the process. So, but again, the specific answer hasn't been found yet.
That's what I was thinking, when the architect, or when it goes to the contractor, I'm just not sure when that.
As I recall,
And obviously a big thing that we've heard all along in that we definitely don't want to delay this process. So, we want to develop a process that ensures the ARB and not delay the construction.
That's good.
We understand there's going to be confusion among owners, like, well, what does the ARB do versus what does the town ordinance do? It's an issue that we need to address.
Specifically with John, when we brought this up, John's concern was multiple drawings. You'd have to have a site drawing, if you wanted to do it in advance, and then when you get a building permit. So his concern was multiple drawings and how to handle it administratively, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of thing he was thinking about.
Getting back to the issue of the ARB and qualifications, just to give us an idea, how many on the staff at ARB currently to operate as efficiently or even more so as you're doing?
I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
We currently have 5.
There's only one person that handles landscape-related issues.
5, and then you have the executive, or you got the board.
We have a board.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
So again, one of the themes of the public comments that we have from before the meeting, that we got before the meeting, is that our criteria are, again, a little bit stringent, that our protected trees it defined as 8 inches or more is maybe too stringent, and that maybe we should consider thinking that would be better at 12 inches? Because at one time, we had sort of had both 8 and 12, depending on where it was on the lot. And then we've sort of switched it all back to 8. But again, reading through these public comments is that maybe 8 is too onerous. And also then one comment was about the tree survey, because I think the tree survey says that everything over 3 inches to be included on the tree survey and preservation plan, and one of the comments was that that's way too demanding. What's your thought on that, Jen?
For a new home development, the language that's in here mimics that. For existing homes, we don't require surveys. But I am guessing, and I'll let others speak if they have a different opinion. I'm guessing that some of the concern is related to guidelines which say may and ordinances which say shall. Because so I think that's maybe where that hesitation is coming from, because all trees need reviewed and approved by the ARB prior to removal, even if they're dead. But we have a history and a long history with me representing the ARB guidelines. So people know how those guidelines are interpreted and upheld. And I think we have a long history of being reasonable in terms of our requirements. And so possibly some of the hesitation is that even though this may be similar, it's the difference of may versus shall. So if the inches were increased, right, from 8 to 12 or whatever the right number is, then it would mean that there was more flexibility in the ordinance just by measure of the caliber inches. And I don't know that, an 8 to 12 inch tree, in terms of meeting your goals of preserving major canopies, is really a big change.
So let me back up a second and ask this question. So for everybody's benefit, Jan and I and Joanne walked the site for the timbers and the Cape a week ago. And if you look at that site, the Cape is virtually clear cut. In fact, not virtually, it is clear cut. And the timbers, after being rebuilt, has, and I'm going to guess, maybe 30% canopy, where in the past it probably would have been close to 100% canopy. And we talked about why that is, and there's groundwater remediation that the builder did that created a lawn space that you could not plant trees in. So, and then they've got a big pool that you can't plant trees in, obviously. And then the trees they put in are palm trees. So as I did that, I went from there and I walked the Upper Beachwalker site and took pictures, and there's numerous what we call specimen trees in there. And when I think about remediation, this is where I get stuck, because if we talk about the timbers is done, and I can't believe there was any remediation done there, and I expect the same thing for the Cape. So we've basically lost almost all of that canopy that was there, and I could see in Upper Beachwalker, we could, based on the current design, we could lose almost all that canopy there. So when we think about the replacement trees, we talk about a tree bank, we talk about the design and the flexibility. I don't know whether there's any flexibility for that water retention basin that they buried at the timbers to be put someplace else, so you could have planted trees there. But that's my concern, is we've lost canopy there almost completely at the timbers. We're going to lose it almost completely at the Cape, And the potential for beach walkers is the same thing. And the remediation, at least as we discussed it, was minimal at best. Is that fair, John?
No.
And so, you know, I think about the tree bank as one solution, but I think about what else could we do in remediation of those sites? You can't bring in big tall trees. You've got to plant trees that are 3 or 4 inches in diameter. I don't know what the solution is, but I see there's a problem there that we're just losing canopy with these big developments and putting in water retention and putting in all these buildings, and you can't replace that canopy. At least it hasn't been replaced in the past. So how do we deal with, all of you, how do we deal with that? If you've seen the Cape, if you've seen the timbers, did you think about what the issues are? How do we keep from just totally losing canopy completely?
Luke, one of the suggestions that was made to me by a citizen was that we should revisit lot coverage and setbacks as a way to help preserve trees.
Some facts regarding the Cape are that they are putting in more than 70%. So, you know, if they have had 100 trees on their site to start with, ARB guidelines require that you put 70 back. You know, that you have 70 at the end, depending on how many came out, impacts how many you have to put back. The same is true for every single family residential home. The Cape is exceeding that percentage on their property. I just looked at those numbers last week. So
Grade A or quality A and B trees, replace quality A and B trees? Because the timbers didn't appear to do that. Timbers appeared to put palms.
So you can put palms in towards meeting the 70%, but they count as 1/3 of a tree. So you have to have 3 palms for every 1 tree
Their base is so big.
that's taken out, because they're not a like-for-like canopy, right? So it takes 3 palms to equal a canopy. But yeah, they are meeting that. The stormwater requirements are mandated by Charleston County for multifamily properties, and you know they're not the town or the ARB or as far as I understand, they have to be within that site to meet the minimum requirements by the county. Single-family residential doesn't have the same stormwater requirements. So most people that are here today and, you know, that the ordinance is applying to single-family residences where you're not gonna have that big area of land that can't be planted. So I just.
Yeah, and my concern is not so much single-family residences. I think that problem is gonna be solved here, and maybe we're too strict even on single-family residences. I'm just sort of anticipating kind of upper beach walker, given what's happened at the Cape. I understand the reason for stormwater runoff, but you can also place stormwater retention basins in a way such that you create an open space for visuals and for lawns and stuff where maybe there's a different place you could put the stormwater and maintain better canopy coverage. In terms of the palm trees, the canopy from a palm, whether it's 10 feet or 25 feet, the canopy's never gonna grow. So it's sort of disingenuous to me if you replace a live oak that's 12 inches in diameter with 3 times as many palms, because that live oak, the canopy will grow multiple times more than the replacement of those palms. But it's better than nothing, okay? I give you that. But that's what I'm thinking about is those specimen trees that are in that upper Beachwalker Park that we're probably gonna lose completely when if they clear cut that like they've done Lot 12 and the Cape and Timbers.
You're talking about lot 13?
Lot 13, sorry, Lot 13.
Mr. Farrell, my name is Glenn Gardner. I'm a landscape architect, and I have several comments to share today. I shared some comments with John before the last meeting because I had to attend a Zoom meeting the last time. But my first comment that I'll share at the moment is that I hear reaction. I hear from clients on Ikeowa, the reaction to clearing at Timbers at Cape. But I feel like that's a completely separate animal from single-family homes.
Do agree.
I think most of you are And I really feel the need for two ordinances, or an A, B with a blanket of a C. Because I think where you try to hold a responsibility for canopy and tree count and lot coverage on a condo project is vastly different from a single-family home. And when I began to read through the ordinance, the time and monetary implications of zoning submittals and additional levels of checks and balances for single-family may be unwarranted for a system that, in my view, isn't broken. I think the ARB has done a very good job protecting the canopy across the island for single-family homes over the years. And that canopy is probably why a lot of you are here. And I can't really ride around and think of many projects where I think that the ARB or the current tree removal or tree preservation rules have failed us. And nearly every property with a new house or an old house has a canopy, unless there's a reason that it may be so windswept that it can't have a canopy. But I think it's really important to consider a differentiation between a public, be it, this town hall, or a for-profit, commercial development, as opposed to a much smaller, single-family, private residential project.
Couldn't agree more. I think there's others on the council that agree with you too. There, with the two separate ordinances, we don't want to solve a problem for clear-cut development and pose a problem for homeowners. We clearly, at least I clearly understand that.
I think that is a valid point, and part of this whole process started because of the clear cutting at the Cape and people concerned about it. And I think we would agree that the ARB has done a good job preserving the canopy for single-family homes. And we are concerned about the process. We don't want to make it harder for single-family homes. We don't want to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that part isn't broken. It has been broken for these larger projects, and our goal is to not let that happen.
One of our recommendations that we received that concerns the pruning recommendation and indicating that essentially it's dealing with single-family homes as well as the broad discussion about pruning. And the recommendation should be brought forward in an additional section on the regular tree care. Is that something that would satisfy your comment about separate or distinct regulations?
I don't know. I think I would probably defer to the other board members as to whether they think that has enough differentiation. To me, it's more about the development of a home. And these lots are all obviously sold for a profit. I mean, that's how everyone got here. And so when people buy a lot, they have the right to develop it. I've always argued that nobody really looked at a tree survey properly when they platted out some of the lots that may have an amazing grand oak right in the middle of the buildable envelope. But I think having a distinction, I think maintenance and pruning certainly falls in a very different category from this initial application process to build a new home. And even the world where we're headed, where I think we all know that will be demolished for new homes to be built. So you begin to look at even trees that were planted 20, 25 years ago as part of a landscape plan when a home was built. How do those now contribute to a landscape of a future canopy where they may not fit within a footprint of a 2024 designed house? So I think it's a pretty big picture to take in.
Before I ask you the bottom line question, if you're going to separate these categories, if you will, between private and commercial, stated, or multifamily, pruning again, how often? The current draft is vague as to how often you won't require pruning, but yet you're holding somebody to a standard that is unclear. is there a recommendation from anybody as to how often, let's get back to the general question first on all affected people by the ordinance, not separating public and private, or as I would refer to as public. How often should pruning be done?
I would probably defer to a tree professional. I mean, some trees never need to be pruned. Some need to be pruned once a year, every 2 years to maintain a view. I think that's a very difficult prescription to make.
Would you suggest a timeline be put in here, or just leave it up to the homeowner or whoever?
I think that should be an as needed, as requested item.
All right, now the bottom line question, and really for anybody to react to, should we attempt it in any way to have an ordinance that affects individual property owners?
Single family.
In what regards?
Developed single-family homes, should this ordinance apply to them at all?
He wants to remove a tree, he should.
Certainly would.
Excuse me?
If they want to remove a tree,
You can do that without this ordinance, but, yeah. Question is, single-family homes should be covered by an ordinance or not?
not about the home. it's
After,
about-
after the lots are cleared, after the home is built, ongoing maintenance, if you will, should that be covered by an ordinance?
My view, since I guess I started this part of the conversation, would be that I get back to the fact that, to me, I don't see any major faults on a single family basis. I hear from people the banter online about, oh, I had a dead tree, I wasn't allowed to cut it down. I mean, those are individual kind of squeaky wheel cases that I'm not saying they should be dismissed, but there has been, in my opinion, a lot of drama associated with a few isolated cases of gaining traction that I think gives the ARB and the people in charge a bad reputation. As a professional who's been privileged to work on the island for a very long time now, I think the ARB and the powers that be to remove trees, to prune trees, to plant new trees, have done a very good job guiding us to successfully create and maintain landscapes on the island. And as long as those powers were to remain, as far as the application process, the approval process, in my mind, that part is not broken at the moment and does not necessarily warrant an entirely new level of submittal and approval that would, of course, add time and money to every project for every homeowner.
I want to help us out here. The subcommittees.
Larry, before you get into remediation, no, I mentioned for other towns, not just the one here, and if there's anyone else who would comment on that point, it'd be helpful.
I won't say it as well as Glenn did, and I'll be brief, but I'm a landscape architect, Josh Dunn, and my initial take would be that most places I work, and I've worked here a lot, but other places have a much more pared down version of an ordinance that applies to, say, a 24-inch tree and greater that's a specimen healthy tree. And what we're looking at here is much more elaborate, much more involved. So my initial take, and I'm still marking down comments to share with John, so take it for what it's worth, would be that I think it's important. The 24-inch and greater world is where I would focus. But there are a lot of specific cases that differ. So it's hard to give a short answer to that question as well.
I'll go back to the previous comment that says it's worked pretty well.
I would agree with that. Let me say a couple more.
Pretty much, we've molded, we've used a lot of the ARB and with Jen's help. So we've been trying to keep, the entire design process was to try to keep this as the envelope that the ARB could fit into, so you don't have, worries about conflicts. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
Some more quick things. I agree with what Glenn said. I think it does work well. I worked I submit to lots of ARBs. I've been on ARBs. This one works well. Design professionals being involved is a good thing. And also, so I think you would want to structure whatever you do to match it to whatever extent you can. And I think it's really important that it works seamlessly because it's already a fairly involved process. And just to try to elaborate a little bit on that, you know, when we do the design process, we start with a survey and we go conceptual, preliminary, final, through permitting and all that. And once you get there, if you run into a snag with zoning, you're going back to go. And it's our job to work through that, but anything we can do here to make it clear what the parameters are would help the design world, if that makes sense.
We're very conscious of the process. The process needs to be really put together very, very completely. I wanted to go back and ask this question regarding separating commercial construction or large construction from individual houses. And the committee has tried to do that. If you look at, do you all have copies of the, okay, on table 4J, which is on page number 9. And and basically, it is trying, first separates individual post-occupancy. So that's the first division that's made. And then within that, there is no, to the point that was brought out, there is no separation between commercial and individual homes at that point. If you're building an individual home, you fall within the second part of that, where it says tree removal for construction activity site development. So are you suggesting that we need to become a little more granular there too? I mean, we've wrestled with this.
I'm just trying to think through whether that language.
Well, the key language there, and this is something, how many times have we gone through this, is within the building footprint or structure, outside of the buildable. So there's a difference between, we've delineated between the building foot, once you lay out the building footprint, that governs one part of it. Then you have the buildable area, which has a little lesser stringent requirements. We've tried to anticipate situations, but if you guys, if there's better ideas, let us know, please. I've got the one idea. I've noted it. Separate commercial from residential is essentially what you're saying.
And maybe those aren't the two right words, but because of course there are development projects that include maybe 10 single-family homes, and that to me wouldn't be single family, that would fall under the commercial category. But I think the private homeowner single family is a different animal from a development project.
So you don't think the building footprint and the outside of the buildable area could handle both the larger commercial developments from the homeowner, from the single home development? Because that's what delineates it at this point.
I mean, I think this would cover the single-family home. But if it covers that, then why shouldn't it be able to cover the multifamily development?
I'm Jay Sipley, a builder here on the island. I'm not in the commercial world, but the big difference when you talk about these commercial projects is the stormwater retention. So all that stormwater retention sort of, Jen can probably speak to well, it takes out a lot of space that had trees, and so that might be something to talk about is the stormwater retention on the commercial projects, because that's basically what takes away the footprint. You can't have a live oak where the county's requiring stormwater retention. So, you might want to focus on stormwater retention on your commercial projects.
Well, the only thing
We don't have to focus on that on single family.
right. Well, again, all these have the ability of the planning director or his designee to basically approve, if there's circumstances such as stormwater retention, then the planning director or his designee can modify the mitigation, can modify the amount of trees that need to be replanted. So, I mean, all of these categories have basically a way that you can lower the expectations.
Has any thought been given to, assuming you make a change, if it's any more restrictive, when this goes into effect? Because there's people, I met with a lot buyer 3 weeks ago, and they asked my opinion on trees, and they're in the process of negotiating a lot, and they're gonna, so in other words, whatever changes you make, there needs to be a grace period between people who design stuff with the current ARB and what would be a change, because that could have a dramatic effect.
To make it more restrictive than the current ARB.
Okay.
So if it complies, or your plans are compliant with the current ARB criteria, then they should be fine with this ordinance as well. So our goal is not to make this more restrictive than the ARB.
I don't know this for a fact, but I assume that if there's been already issued building permit under the current approvals, that'll stay in effect. It'll be for any new building permits that are issued after this has been enacted by town council, if it's enacted.
Well, no, I just want to make sure that, there's design professionals who are meeting with ARB for, weeks, months, years maybe about projects that aren't ready for a building permit. And then I hate to see a change going to tree ordinance, and then I go to apply for a building permit next month, and John says, sorry, you don't meet planning and zoning because the tree ordinance went into effect, and it has this massive domino effect that affects, maybe 2 years of work for design professionals.
You're talking about projects that are in process but not yet permitted.
Correct. Yeah, because there's a lot of thought and work that goes into that. Yeah, so there needs to be, make sure there's a grace period, a good education period, for that transition period. So there's a lot of pain and anguish.
I think there's.
Our goal is not to make it more difficult, and, that's why we're trying to not make it any more restrictive than the ARB. We're fine if it's even a little less restrictive than the ARB. We need to figure out the process like we've talked about. Obviously, we don't want to delay the process, and certainly every one of these things, has the planning director's ability for him to make a judgment decision. Some of the public comments talked about different types of trees. A water oak is different than, and again, there's no way we can write that all into the ordinance. But that's, again, part of this, where the planning director or his designee, and the designee is supposed to be somebody who's very knowledgeable about trees, is going to be able to look at these specific instances and make, those subjective decisions, just as Jen does now.
I think that's worth repeating. I mean, there's kind of three things that we're thinking about. One is that it fits within the current ARB guidelines, not more restrictive, same or less restrictive. Really important. Number two, we've heard time and time again, it can't delay the process. The permitting has to be done up front for this so that the site design, the architect can do one building. Number two. Number three, people say, well, why are you doing this at all? We're not planning for this, but what happened if the ARB went away? We don't want a situation where people can go in and cut their, all trees down in their lot, or developers can clear cut. So this is to plan for, if the ARB disappeared tomorrow, there's legislation in place that prevents the island from changing its complexion that we love and build, why we live here today. So those are the three, it's worth remembering those three fundamental tenets. No more restrictive, sensitive to time, and keep the island like it is.
I've been sitting here thinking a lot more about the commercial versus single family, and I think are all of you who are here today, builders, landscape architects, do you all represent single families? Is there anyone here who represents a commercial? Because I think it's the massive destruction of canopy that we're concerned about. We're not looking to make things more difficult for single family people, design professionals, builders, owners. But we are concerned that some of these, as Luke said, we walk these areas, and he walked, the Upper Beach Walker. Bigger buildings they have a lot more big equipment coming in and require a lot more space, and that requires a lot more habitat destruction, and that's what we're trying to prevent.
Steve, did you have a comment?
I did, Bill. I was just going to say our mitigation requirement is the same regardless of lot size. And if we're required to mitigate for 20 inches of trees, that's easier on some properties than others. And even if we won't, as a builder, we don't always know where we're going to run our utilities. Because they say the sewer connection is here doesn't necessarily make it gospel. As generators have become more popular, we're challenged with putting a 1,000-gallon tank somewhere on the property. So on a smaller property, are we mitigating for 20 inches of trees at the future detriment of these trees or the property or utilities as these root systems grow just to meet a requirement?
Good point.
It may be that some of the language, and I think it was brought up earlier, some of the language, while it may not be intended to be more restrictive, is interpreted to be more restrictive because the language that's used in a lot of the draft is somewhat very requirement oriented. It's you're required to do this, you're required to do that. You've got to get this mitigated. You don't need it here. The designing with nature language, if you want to use that as a guide, is much more, I wouldn't say permissive, but much more interpretive. You can use it in a way that says, for example, unless there's a change in the appearance, well, that gives the person reviewing a document a clear understanding of what they're looking at without going into a detailed regulation. And I think in terms of drafting, we may be drafting, quote, governmental language, which is different than what even the, what I would call a commercial, or if you will, the more permissive document in drafting or designing with nature.
I think I can speak for the subcommittee and tell you we're very, very aware of the difference between will and shall.
Yeah, but it may not be.
But when you're writing a regulation, you can't say we'd like you to do this.
Right.
We can't say that. But what we've done is we've developed a tree review board, and we've given the planning director more latitudes than we started with. So that was our attempt to provide the ability to go from must to maybe.
Each one of these must replant, and with the discretion of the planning director.
Right.
So, I mean, everything has that ability to have a subjective review that says, you're right, this lot shouldn't have 20 more trees on it. And so instead, plant 5 and we'll all be happy.
Comment back here.
Yes, my name is Matthew Stannis. I'm not a builder, I'm not a landscape architect. I've been a horticulturist. I'm now for 22 years. So I come from a little bit different viewpoint. I'm more about growing plants and the health of plants. But at the same time, very connected, great working relationship with Jen, and I do believe she has, the way she uses reason on projects. I believe, I lean heavily on her for projects that I need to accomplish. Same as I rely heavily on, arborists to prune and maintain trees because for my goals. I think, people get hung up on canopy, number of trees, density of trees. I'm from a different aspect of I would rather see less trees, less canopy, because with full canopy, all these trees, you don't have biodiversity. I've got 5 species that I can use and plant on the island that deer don't eat, that saltwater intrusion doesn't get, that, lives in 100% shaded environment within among roots. I'd rather have 3 palm trees than more of those trees because I can plant 10-fold of the number of species in sunlight and grow flowers and grasses and plants. So I think, I would try to view it from an approach of more of density and what should happen, as Jed mentioned, as opposed to, when you said I got to take out 3 trees, we got to plant 20 more, that would scare the Jesus out of me, because I know, as of now, trees we planted 20 years ago, I'm facing the reality of now those trees are mature, their root competition and their shade competition is outcompeting everything else, and now you're losing the understory plantings because these trees are outcompeting. And I'm faced with having to remove these trees because we planted them too densely. So you need to look, what are these trees going to be 15, 20, 30 years down the road? And what is going to be sustainable under those trees? If you want wildlife cover, if you want screening or things like that, it becomes much more difficult. And then you really do need the pruning, because we need sunlight. You need you need annual pruning, if not every 3 to 5 years pruning. So, please, you can't say you got to plant a bunch of trees and then restrict pruning. Because if you want other species than just trees to grow, then you need sunlight and you need space. A project down the road that I was heavily involved with was, doing some forestry work on property. And, we went from a tree density of 200 trees per acre down to 80 trees per acre. And that was all for, one, we were removing second trees. We left all A and B trees. You left good, hardy, tall pine trees. But what you got is this forest that was nothing but crunchy leaves. Now you have a beautiful meadow of forbs of passion flower, monarda, bee balm, butterfly weed, and, just mallow. You've got, just lots of grasses. Now, I know we're talking about landscapes, and we're not talking about nature, but just having sunlight to the ground is just so much more advantageous, in my opinion, from a horticultural standpoint, than the tree canopy. That's all I have to say about that.
We heard from an architect, we heard from Chad about that at the last meeting, where he was talking about thinking about the habitat, which is not just the trees, but is also the understory. And the Conservancy had a slogan 10 to 15 years ago that said understory is the whole story, because they were, and that's what ARB changed our guidelines to require multiple layers of understory for new homes to supplement and try to add to that goal. That it's not just about the trees, it's about creating areas for habitat and animals to thrive. So it's not just this layer, it's also the under layer.
Two other things regarding that. When you have a large tree canopy, a mature grand oak tree, it can transpire up to 50 gallons of water a day. So when you're planting things under there, you've got to water extra to give them the water, and you have to give them extra fertilizer. Because they're in shade environments, they're stressed, they get attacked by disease and insects. I'm adding more chemicals and pesticides to the environment. So there are downfalls to having total coverage of canopy, with trees. So there are, I think it's more of having a balanced environment, not just a two-tier environment of a canopy and a landscape, so to speak. I think you need to balance that. And just one thing I thought was neat one time is, after Matthew, we lost a lot of trees, Hurricane Matthew. I took my kids down to the viewing tower at the end of Marsh Hawk, and there's a vacant lot down the whole left side of that turnaround at the end of Marsh Hawk. All the trees blew down. I remember seeing that, and just all these falling over trees, and what a mess. And I was like, oh, that's ugly. I went back not too long ago, and it was a beautiful wildflower meadow of tick seed and coreopsis. There's fritillarias and monarch butterflies, and it's like a second successional age of vegetation, because it had sunlight and didn't have tree canopy that Mother Nature completely did. It was untouched by man. But it's just an example of how trees aren't everything. That's all I was saying.
And I think John has tried to incorporate that into this draft on page 3, at the top of the page, number 3 is where he talks about, removal of trees, because the density of trees is great enough that removal would be beneficial to the overall area. And I think you used the word environment, but actually that's where we were talking about habitat. So I think John's addressed that again, but that process is going to be, is going to require a certified arborist. So, it's going to be the homeowner's discretion or whoever's getting ready for the next PGA event. So yeah, we want to preserve habitat, and we realize that pruning is important, and as well as sometimes removing trees. So, you know, I think that's included, but again, you know, John's put it in here that you'll have to have a permit to do that kind of work.
And your comment really resonates with me because the understory issue, if you have all pine forest, there's no understory in a pine forest. So there's a bunch of us who heard that and talked about that last time. It's great for you to say it again. Thank you.
And as brief follow-up to Matt's comment, it sounds like there may be potential for the zoning administrator to be reasonable and allow that when there is already a strong canopy, even though you owe, let's say, 4 or 5 mitigation trees for clearing the home, the administrator could say, well, we have enough canopy on this site, or maybe you need 2 canopy trees, but you do owe us trees because of what you cleared, but I can be reasonable and allow you to plant understory trees in a grouping where they're needed and where you can create a multi-tiered canopy instead of just one prescriptive canopy.
That was one of the things that we broke this down because of the size of the task into, we're doing the tree ordinance now, but we're going to do a landscaping ordinance too to complement it. And I think that any kind of input would be great for us when we pull that together.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, Trevor Buffington with Buffington Homes. I'm going to kind of echo Jen's comment earlier that no matter what the language in this ordinance says, it's really going to come down to who's enforcing this. And I think that's my biggest fear. I mean, we have a great working relationship with the ARB. Whenever we call out Jen, we might not always get the answer we want, but it is always reasonable. That word reasonable, I think, is so important. So I think the long and short of this is, I think we really need to have a well-educated landscape architect who really is the enforcer of this, not less an arborist, because I think the architecture is what we're really talking about, how the house architecture works with the trees in the site, and all of that needs to sort of work together. So I think that's my big fear.
And I think, again, while we haven't determined the process, I think obviously that this designee is going to be that individual, and that individual is going to work closely with Jen, because there is some duplication, so there doesn't need to be, complete duplication of everything. So this designee is going to be someone who's qualified to make those kind of subjective decisions and also work closely with Jen and not to delay the process.
Now, we could also look at, for either the tree board or even for part use, the designee is using consultants, much as the ARB does. Like some of you guys have said you've served on ARBs. I know the architect I use served on a different ARB, and perhaps we should have some of those people on call on a consulting basis to help answer some of those concerns. That I don't know that we could afford to hire one person on staff on the town. Do we really want to have a qualified landscape architect or arborist in that job? That maybe the answer could be for some lots to have a roster of consultants that we could call on to help supplement, because the planning director does not have that expertise.
The sense in reading it, though, building and building permitting is under the planning director as it stands now. If we're talking about a group of people, whether it be 5 or, as governments go, 50 people, that group would also fall under the same line as the building department. And so the building and the architectural review, or whatever you want to call it, group would be under the planning director. Planning director would not be the one, but the designee, he may be the one who is the designee to resolve problems. But the problem, initial reaction, and the effectiveness of the performance of the group to do what the ordinance requires, is going to be vested in this other group. I don't see it as being in the planning director. I see it as being in the planning department, but yet in an architectural group, just like the building permitting group. It all falls under building or planning. So that's unclear, but again, if you want to do that in procedures, fine. But it should be clear in structure how we see this organization, this group of people that are going to be required to service this ordinance fit. Where do they fit? Who do they report to? And ultimately, what authority do they have without resolving problems?
And I think those are all excellent points. The only thing is, again, our focus is on the document.
No, I'm not
Finishing the
saying that.
document, and then moving on to the landscape plan and the process.
Right.
And the composition of the tree preservation board, and who's gonna be the designee, and how they're gonna work with the current ARB process. So there's a lot of other issues, but our task and what we wanna complete first is to finish this document.
Ron, I'm not at all commenting on the document.
I know, and that's why I'm
Suggesting
trying to
the comments that
focus
we're
us back.
talking about and where they fit. We'll get to the individual document at some point today, and I've got a lot of individual comments, but nothing to do with the general comments we're talking about.
Okay.
Just going back to being less restrictive than the ARB, the table that we're looking at right now, I just wanted to point out it is more restrictive than the ARB as you look at the mitigation standard, because it does say 100% mitigation. And yeah.
So which one, under
The top,
Really, for all of the mitigation standards,
they're all 100%?
our minimum requirement is 70% of the tree quantity.
When we changed that, I guess, okay, so there was 70% tree standard.
So you may want to consider,
Jen, you said the tree quantity, not
Yes.
the DBA, not the
not the DBH.
DBA is a huge difference there.
There is, and it was changed to quantity for the town ordinance on everything but the specimen trees. So that still is more restrictive as a minimum standard. We do sometimes require inch per inch mitigation, and that is normally for specimen trees, but it is not always the case. So if you wanted to change the language to have the minimum be less restrictive, then that would change as well.
change to 70% tree for a tree for all non-specimen trees, and then change the specimen trees to just grade A and B specimen trees, and then change that to 70% per inch, or?
No, I mean, our standard, our practice, I guess, is 100%, but it's not a,
It
it's
depends.
not a minimum requirement.
Yeah, I would say it depends on certain site conditions. I think that's one thing I would like to point out, Tommy Manuel, ARB Director. As you begin to incorporate all these wonderful comments, great comments, to think about the intent of the ordinance. That's what we think about in terms of our guidelines. What are the intent? What are we trying to do? And the overarching goal is to really balance both design and nature. And that's why we have, to what some people may say as too much flexibility, or we see it as a way to respond to specific site conditions, because not every site on Kiowa is the same. And we want to be sensitive to that but just as a broad comment and just picking up on what everyone has said, is the intent is really important here.
Appreciate that. And following our meeting today, if some of you get back to what you're doing and you thought about something you wish you had said, or you see something in the notes you want to make a further comment on, send an email to John Taylor. Your comments become part of public record, and then John will forward those comments to each of us. Because at the end of the day, the way success looks for us is to put something in place that protects the trees, but does not burden the builder or the homeowners. And I think that's how we are trying to view success with this program, and we'll continue and hopefully keep prodding until we feel good enough to present it to the town, which hopefully is very soon. Any other comments?
You guys also have, I think in here, correct me if I'm wrong, Joanne, we've got like a 20 tree per acre minimum standard.
Well, I think again, I think we got that from another municipality where we wanted to maintain a minimum tree density. And it's footnote number 1 in the mitigation, just underneath this table. For density, or you could say a minimum density, and there's other municipalities that had 40 trees per acre to 60 trees per acre. John chose 20 trees per acre, and then
You guys have a standard like that?
from multiple other municipalities that we reviewed.
That's not, I've got 42 palm trees alone on my lot, so 20 trees, 2/3 of an acre, so 20 trees is not owners, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't more restrictive.
Yeah, and this is sort of just saying, this is what we'd like to see as a minimum. And the last part of this is that, that by the time you're done with your development, that have at least 50% of the number of trees that you started with on the lot.
Given the fact that most of, not all of it, but percentage-wise, there's a lot of land on Kiowa that was farmland.
Is what?
Farmland.
Okay.
Since the island was formed, I guess officially 25, 35 years ago, there was a lot of tree growth. But on areas that have not been developed yet, those trees don't represent the grand oaks or the very large specimen trees that we were thinking about, or that I guess went into the thinking in the ordinance. How do you deal with coverage on lots where there basically are no major trees now, other than what I would call scrubs, scrub pine, scrub whatever? But the fact is, to require a minimum number of trees has to be very, very limited in circumstances where there's room. So again, all the site planning, all the area that you can't specify a specific number or percentage.
And if you look at the language, it doesn't say we're demanding this. It doesn't say this is a requirement. It says preferred. Other words that we had toyed around with was a goal, so it's not again, this is a footnote that John sort of described to me, that this was going to be used by the planning director or his designee guideline of when he looks at a site plan and says, okay, here's what they're intending to do, how many trees are left. So somewhat, this is, again, to help John or his designee or the tree preservation board make a decision whether they approve the plan or not approve. So these are some minimum requirements or minimum goals that they'd like to see. 50% of the trees are replaced, 20 trees per acre when you're all said and done, or 160 inches of trees per acre when you're all said and done.
Again, you referred to the Tree Preservation Board. I thought that seems like it should be a court of last resort. If the homeowner, landscape architects or whoever can't agree with the regulatory group, whether it be the planning director or the architectural review board, or whatever you want to call it, then it goes to a resolution, not to the planning director, to this board as a last resort. But what you're saying is setting up a standard where it's not required, but yet there could be a challenge.
Again, John described this to me as this was a goals that he can use, or his designee, when they're looking at plans to say, yes, this plan meets these requirements. Even though they have to take down 12 trees, they still have more than 50% of the trees that they started with. So again, this was to help set some standards or set some goals so that the planning director or designee can look at a plan and say, that's a plan that they can approve or not.
But again, that's a requirement then for him to do. He's got to make a judgment that this either meets or doesn't meet, which sets up the possibility of the homeowner or future homeowner going to this commission, which is the last resort, when in fact it's not required.
Again, there's lots of judgments in here for, that's part of this, shall and may, or, we've left language in here to allow the process to have some subjectivity.
Well, I think the comment we heard earlier is you've got to make this easier to not conform, but more conforming to the Architectural Review Board standards, and provide language that's consistent and gives the flexibility that they use now, if you want a standard that looks the same or works the same.
I think we could meet with John, talk through some of those things. It's a good point, Andy. Comment back here, I saw a hand go up.
Yeah, I just want to, as it's written now, that would apply to single family.
Commercial. Well, across the board, right?
Yeah. We haven't developed different standards for different construction.
Any other comments? I'm gonna move ahead and get to the commissioner's final comments, but I want to give you a chance to make any final comments to the planning commission. Certainly appreciate your attendance, and I know it's taking you away from your work, and the difference between you guys and us is you are working, and we appreciate that. Commissioner comments?
Are we making final comments?
Yeah.
Or we're not going to go through the draft?
I don't think we need to. I think we've talked about the things that was the most prevalent on people's minds, and I think as everybody goes back and look at this, they can certainly send additional comments to John, and we'll look at those, but I don't want to, don't think there's a need to go any further, I don't think.
All right, then let me skip to the overarching general comments I have.
Please.
One is, I believe in the draft, we're fixing a problem that doesn't exist. I understand you want something in place if the ARB goes away, but even still, the problem that you're trying to fix to make it the same, or not a problem, but the need to have a document in place to make it the same goes well beyond what exists now. And as I said, it's a bigger problem, especially and most importantly, where it includes private properties, private homes on developed lots. There's no distinction here between developed and undeveloped lots of private owners. Does the standard apply to that? Do we have to go prune that, even though somebody owns it, but they're not building a house on it yet? Does somebody have to maintain that lot? That's not covered. There are a whole bunch of things in here that relate to I guess, regulation of private property. And I don't think, number one, the town has the right or the responsibility to manage and regulate the use of private property. Trees are private property. They're not public property. Once the site plan is approved, the house is built, and you're in there, trees belong to the owner. It's up to the owner to maintain it. Now, I made a suggestion to John, which I will read very quickly. It was with respect to this issue. And I'll tell you first, I said I'm in general agreement with most of the requirements, but then I added, I said, the one overarching comment is to separate the document into two distinct parts, tree preservation and removal. As far as from developed properties and then tree removal in connection with new construction or undeveloped properties. The section on developed properties should be stated in a way that gives the town's expectations as to how trees are to be maintained by the homeowner. Not a mandate, not a regulation, but the town's expectations of what private homeowners should do with their private property. Also, to stipulate a time frame over which the expectation should be completed, i.e. annually, periodically, but again, an expectation, not a mandate. And then also that the work may be done by the homeowner or any tree contractor qualified under the standards that we set out, and I agree with the comment that we should be using the ANSI A300 standards, but not necessarily a license by the state, as we point out, doesn't exist. A certified tree arborist, it could be anybody who meets those standards. So that was my suggestion, if we're going to separate it, and I still think it's mandatory that we have to separate it, otherwise I don't believe I can approve it. I think we're focused, unfortunately, we're focused on the forest, on the trees and not the forest. You're overlooking the big picture of what the island is, what it's been, and how it got to be where it is, and we want to keep it that way. And what you're doing is developing, as we did, unfortunately, with zoning, we've developed something where the government is going to tell you what to do. And that's where I came out on the regulation. I realize you were asked to develop it. I'm not criticizing the fact that you developed and did your best to do it, but I don't think it meets the needs of the island or the community that everybody wants to satisfy.
Thank you, Andy.
That's what I have.
Luke?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. First, let me again thank Jen for walking the sites with us last week. It was very informative and educational for me. Any comments I made about the Cape and the timbers and any other lots and clear cutting, not directed at you. It's more of thinking about the outcome we have and outcomes we want going forward. So your work is greatly appreciated. Number three, I think Ron and Joanne and Larry have done a great job with this ordinance. I think you've listened to kind of the feedback from the council. You've listened to feedback from 3 sets of workshops, and I think we're really, really close. I think it does represent probably the best thought process for individual homeowners post-occupancy versus new construction versus site development. So I think those, to me, those are clear delineations in the ordinance. I think there's a lot of work to do after this is finalized in terms of the process, in terms of hiring people, in terms of gaining your confidence that this is going to work. It's not going to be an oversome burden on you. It's not going to delay things a lot. That execution is going to be very important, and how we and how John works to get that execution correct so that I, as a homeowner, am not tortured by having to cut down a tree or trim some limbs. And you, as employees or contractors, are not tortured by the delays and the frustrations around the bureaucracy. I think we're in a good place, and I think we're moving to a better place. So thank you all for your contributions.
Larry?
I just want to offer my thanks to everybody who's here and who came to the last meetings, who sent comments in. This document, as whatever it is as good, is been improved by all your participation, and we really appreciate it because, you know, I ran metal cutting factories, so I didn't know anything about trees and green stuff. So you guys educated me, and I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Madeline?
Yes, I followed the iteration of this now for quite some time, and want to applaud all of you for your input, for the generous amount of time that you've given to this project and to educating all of us. Even today, I learn more every time you guys come in and teach us something. So whether it's canopy or understory, this is a very nuanced ordinance, and I think the subcommittee has done a terrific job in appreciating those nuances and taking them into account and making the revisions that are making this a better document. There's so much to know here, and I really, really applaud you guys for digging into it. And I agree with Luke. We're close. I'm confident that you guys are going to tweak it a little bit more, reflecting today's comments, but thank you all for being an important part of this process.
Thanks, Madeline. Joanne?
It's all been said. I echo the thanks. We all said when we started out as a subcommittee, we'd never actually written an ordinance, and none of us were tree people. So it has been a good education and very important for us to listen, and Jen has been great, and all the comments. We hear you, and we will do our best to make this the best thing for Kiowa Island. That's our goal.
Dr. Curran, you close this out?
Sure. I also echo everyone else's comment. I thank you all for your participation, and I also want to applaud John Taylor for all his hard work. I'm sorry he couldn't be here, obviously, but he's put in, I can't imagine how many hours on this. So I thank you all for your participation. Please, if you have other comments, email John, and hopefully we can get this finished up soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a motion